Brodes Media.
What do you know? The gift that keeps on giving. Alrighty. Before we talk about Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni for the 5 millionth time, if you are new to the channel, hello, welcome on in. We talk about Philly sports every day here. The good, the bad, the ugly. If you want to take me on the road with you, you can go on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, search Sports Talk with Brodes. Subscribe over there. Subscribe here too. I forget if I said that or not. But yes, and you can leave a 5-star rating and a review on the podcast feeds. That would mean the world. Thank you. And lastly, if you're interested in Coffee with Brodes live streams twice a week here on YouTube, all you have to do is join the memberships here. You also get access to our Discord channel. The information is all down below in the description. So seriously, you guys are the best in the world. Can't thank you enough for all the crazy support. All right, enjoy the show. Back like we never left. Back where we belong. Discussing the relationship problems between the quarterback and the head coach. Now, I have the entire piece printed and highlighted with a bunch of topics that I want to hit on. Before we actually get into the meat and potatoes, though, I have a few things to get off my chest. Number one, this wasn't made up. Tim McManus and Jeremy Fowler did an amazing job covering this story and laying it out in full detail, how they went from where they were last season during the downfall to where they are now with Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio, and most importantly, Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. It was sensational from a journalism standpoint. A lot of sources involved, and it wasn't just a hit piece that had one guy as the target, and it was a clear objective to screw over Nick or to screw over Jalen. There was a lot of info and a lot of news from both sides. Some that blame Jalen, some that blame Nick, which is probably real, considering when you go through that funk, there's blame to pass around everywhere. So that's number one. Number two is it still matters. Yes, it's a different season, and we're entering 2024, but the people involved are still here. The two people we are talking about, one's the quarterback, one's the head coach. They are still here, okay? So it matters. Number three, I needed this. Because I was getting carried away by Jalen Hurts and his training camp on the field and how he hasn't turned the ball over, how I'm watching Elliott Shore-Parks and his training camp stats, and I'm getting all like insanely pumped up thinking about what can be. And I got sucked into the initial press conference when Nick and Jalen both got here for training camp and said the right things, and it felt genuine. And I stand by that. Those initial press conferences, since the terrible one that Jalen had a few months ago, did feel genuine. Then, the Eagles started posting a bunch of social media stuff. And maybe it wasn't just the Eagles. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe there were a lot of parties involved. Regardless, there was something off when Nick and Jalen are riding in the golf cart and everybody's snagging pictures of them smiling ear to ear. It didn't look authentic. It felt fake. It wasn't organic. And now I'm starting to wonder, did they know this ESPN article was coming out and they were getting out in front of it in the best way that they could by putting on a brave face? There's no way that Jalen goes from where he was 2 months ago to best friends with the guy. And the way that it's being perceived now with public perception due to all the giggles and the high fives and the over obnoxious love for one another is they are the bestest friends to ever walk planet Earth. It doesn't move that quickly, especially when you get into the nuts and bolts of this thing. There was a loss of respect for one another. At least that's how I read it. So I needed this. This was a wake up, Brodes. Don't forget how bad it was. Don't get too emotionally tied to not turning the rock over if you're Jalen, because there's more to it. There was a reason why I was obsessed with the story for as long as I was. There's a deep issue here. To Nick's credit, apparently he got out in front of the team and held himself accountable for it. It was emotional. It was passionate, which is no surprise. That's what he does. And he laid it out there that he is taking responsibility for how it went last year. That's step one. Do I think Jalen and Nick are in a fine spot today, currently? I think that there's a path in place for this to work, even with the awkwardness. To me, there is still an issue, and they masked the issue by putting in a middleman. Kellen Moore is the third party that is somewhat separating the two. So it's not impossible to succeed as long as Kellen Moore dips into his bag, Nick Sirianni stays the hell away, and Jalen and Kellen Moore go to work. That's how this is going to play out successfully, is if Nick stays the hell away from Jalen. But the front office and the organization essentially figured the best way to do this, if we are going to keep Nick, that's a big if. Because as the article laid out, Bill Belichick was a serious option. There was potentially a move at head coach. It was truly discussed. If we do keep Nick, though, what we have to do is separate those two so they don't bash heads. It's an interesting dynamic. Not impossible to work, but it really is less about Nick and Jalen now. Which is weird because, once again, it diminishes the head coach. So, anyway, it's not all the information being new to us. There's a lot that we did understand, but there's some very interesting wrinkles along the way. My biggest takeaway, though, was they did not respect one another. That's hard to get back. And they added a middleman to try and keep the relationship as professional as they can. But that seems odd to me that they felt the best way to do this was to separate and split up the head coach and quarterback. It's just crazy. So, in regards to Nick Sirianni, let's dive into this and what I have highlighted. And the fact that he was a passionate coach, and it came from the heart when he told the entire organization that he did not do a good enough job. His goal was to show accountability, according to a team source, and stress the need for others to do the same if the Eagles were going to correct what went wrong and move forward. Coming away from this, by the way, I just wanted to be clear that I definitely still have the same feelings that I did previously. Jalen was right to not be excited about Nick. His offense sucked, and Nick is a bigger part of the problem than anything else. Just so you understand where I'm at with some of my takes. When I hear that, though, that his goal was to show accountability and he wanted to stress the need for others to do the same if the Eagles were to correct what went wrong, I get where he's coming from, but it almost sounds to me that he stared everybody in the eyes and said, all right, listen, I was wrong. Now you better say you're wrong too. Well, does it have the same impact if that's the case? I will admit that there's a part of me that feels I could be potentially reaching a little far with that one, and I didn't want to necessarily start with that one just because I get it. Maybe that is a tiny bit of a stretch, and we should just be excited that he was willing, as the leader, to say, I was wrong. Reality is, though, he had to, or else his job was going to get taken from him. He knew he had to, or else he'd be looking for a job. And I'm not necessarily sure if he would have got picked up off the street to go be hired by any other franchise if the Eagles did move on from him. So part of me wonders how much of that was just to save his job. And once the entire team recognizes the only reason he's here is because he has no more power anymore, there's only one way to go about this, is admit that he was wrong and now he's going to adapt to a different style. But hey, if I was wrong, you better say that you were wrong too. That's sort of what I felt. One source with direct knowledge of the dynamic described the relationship as fractured, okay, and unhealthy. Okay. At the root of the divide, a disconnect in the offensive visions, with what a team source described as a lack of full respect of Sirianni'S X's and O's chops. Yeah, I saw it too. He stinks when it comes to scheme. He wouldn't allow Brian Johnson and Jalen Hurts to elevate the offense and take it to the next step. And apparently, it was because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But Nick, what you're forgetting here is this is the National Football League. If you don't adapt and make any changes and add some sexiness and differences to your offense and add another layer to it, you will get caught up on. They sniff this out like nothing. These are pros who study tape for 15 hours a day, if not 20. If you're going to get mad that Jalen and Brian Johnson want to establish something a little different, tweak some concepts and ideas to make the offense a tad different than what was being utilized, especially if it's pre-snap movement, something you didn't want anything about, or you didn't want anything with, you wanted nothing about it, which is a joke considering they go grab Kellen Moore, and that's what we are going to see on a game-by-game basis, because that's called the next step in a real legitimate offense that you didn't have last season. So if that's what Jalen and Brian Johnson wanted to do and Nick put his feet down and said, absolutely not, what are you doing, Nick? There was apparently a time where players didn't know when Nick was stepping in and calling plays or if it was Brian Johnson. I told you Brian Johnson was not as bad as the ridiculing was. We have zero knowledge on who Brian Johnson is. Zero. Apparently, Jalen and Johnson wanted to evolve the system, and, quote, that did not fly for Nick. And in Washington, when they played the Commanders, or that game might have been here, I forget, Week 4 against the Commanders, on a critical 3rd and long play, this is just one of the examples of many, Brian Johnson wanted to pass, and Nick Sirianni dialed up a run, which did not pan out. The line was blurred enough that some offensive players did not know who was actually calling the plays. Come on, dude. Come on! I don't understand. So this is something that I am fascinated about. This angle here. Jalen Hurts believed the Eagles were overly reliant on vertical routes and not utilizing short to intermediate throws, particularly over the middle of the field where Brown has thrived in his career, a source close to Hurts said. His hope was that things would change as the Eagles began to lose games, but changes never came. There's a lot of Jalen Hurts haters that always throw out there that Jalen is incapable of throwing certain throws and he can't do this and he can't do that. What I'm hearing is Jalen wanted to maximize his skill position players by getting the football in their hands with quick throws and letting them use the middle of the field. But the dumbness in the offense, where there's just vertical routes flying and the blitz is getting thrown into your face. There's not enough time for these plays to develop when you're bringing extra pressure, when you're bringing more guys than you can block. You're sending them downfield and saying, Devontae, AJ, go run as far as you can when Jalen's got a half a second to step back before somebody's in his face. And it got so bad that Jalen called Wink, the defensive coordinator for the Giants, asking what he was seeing and what he was doing. Two ways to look at that. One, that's awesome, because that's what Jalen Hurts does. He's obsessed with the game. He always wants to get better. He's trying to improve. That's great. The other side is, are you spitting in the face of your coaching staff? Wink has been around more than I've breathed air, okay? He's as veteran comes in this league. Go listen to his remarks. I've never had that happen once in my long career of coaching football, where an opposing team's quarterback hits me up and says, let's talk. Give me 30 minutes and some details on what you were seeing. It's great that he's willing to absorb that and be a sponge and soak it in. I get it. I truly do. From an individual trying to grow and become the best quarterback he can be, it's phenomenal. It also tells you he's got zero belief in this staff to have the answers. You don't go to the other team, your rival in the NFC East, the New York Giants, who eventually let him go, but you go to them for answers to the test? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. It's crazy. It really is. And something that Wink stated was they weren't committed to the run. They weren't committed to quarterback runs. They were trying to throw the ball a little bit too much on early downs, which put them behind the sticks, and that's when we can have our defense go to work, essentially. I want to bring up the one issue about some of the meetings that went down between those two. It would get so bad that you literally needed somebody else to be in the room with them. Last year, it was Nick was going to do what Nick was going to do, said a team source about the Eagles' offense. It's crazy. I told you it wasn't Brian Johnson. Do I think that they'll go to dinner together? Hell no, a team source said, but it could be a good working professional relationship, and I don't think there's hatred. There might not be now, but what happens the second adversity hits, the second a problem occurs, the second Nick Sirianni sees something that he doesn't find pleasurable, and then he goes after Kellen Moore like, yo, dude, my name's on this thing. This record goes under my name. I don't like what you're doing. Yo, Vic, I despise what you're doing. The only way he doesn't do that is if he was handed the keys to the job with Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Loring say, you don't stand a chance to argue against either of those two. Now, it would be foolish to even bring Sirianni back in charge if that was the case anyway, but I truly think there was a deep, deep discussion about how things are going to be handled if you go through a 2-game losing streak, if you lose 3 out of 4 football games. It's the NFL. There's a lot of travel early. Brazil, New Orleans. There's a game against, what else was there? I know they play the Falcons. There's a game, in Tampa Bay against the Buccaneers in the early stages. So there's a lot of question marks on how this is going to go. There might be a few games where it gets ugly. Does Nick Sirianni even have the ability to tell Kellen Moore, I don't like that, I don't want that to continue? Probably not. Now, to be fair, you know my stance. Here's the other side. Jalen does not give Nick enough credit, the source added. A lot of what we do well stems from Nick. One team source described it as Hurts trying to play hero ball. Another put it this way. He was trying to prove he was worth $250 million every throw. Now, here's my guess, and I'm just speculating. My guess is that's coming from someone who's been on Nick Sirianni's coaching tree for a while and has ties to Nick. Nick has helped them along the way. Nick has given them some positional jobs, and they're trying to make the work up the ranks. So eventually they could become a quarterback's coach or an offensive coordinator or a wide receiver coach, and then eventually the dream for all of these coaches is to be a head coach one day. My guess is someone who's taking the side of Nick is more on the coaching side than anyone else. Because, I mean, A.J. Brown and Jalen, when they're at the line of scrimmage and they're making stuff up on the fly because, well, Nick's designs are crap, A.J.'s buying in to making stuff up on the fly because he's also aware. That offense knew that this wasn't right. Now, I'm looking exactly for the way that those two worked together in meetings. Hurts is considered more reserved, sometimes internalizing conflict, something which Sirianni is often comfortable, according to team sources. Okay, expressing kind of like their way they have their personalities. Yeah, it's different. The dynamic presents challenges when the two interact. There was never a moment last year where they were operating in a healthy relationship. That's gnarly stuff, man. Oh, here you go. This was it. The Hurts-Sirianni dynamic does not work as well when it's one-on-one, a team source said, requiring a third party to be prominently involved for the offense to run at a high level. It's amazing. It's amazing. Let me reiterate here. I buy everything that Tim McManus and Jeremy Fowler put into this. There's a lot of people involved with being sourced. There was a lot of research that was done. I get that it's annoying that this is constantly still being discussed. And there is a part of me that wants to close that chapter and start fresh. And it took me a while to get there. And as soon as I started to see training camp and specifically how well Jalen Hurts was doing, I started to get the good vibes and the energy was starting to shift towards being excited again. And even hearing the initial first time both of them got in front of the mics and told the media, this is how I feel, we're in good spirits right now, I thought that felt authentic and genuine. Everything since then, though, sort of looks odd and strange. They are doing too much to try and shove this down your throat that they have this great bond. They don't. They don't. It would almost probably be better if it was publicly known, like, hey, listen, They don't love one another. They don't love one another. Let's stop sugarcoating this thing. But they're going to make this thing work. And they're going to put their heads together and thrive with the addition of Kellen Moore. I mean, I would almost at least respect that more because this looks foolish now. It looks back to being childish. So my excitement meter, I was sitting around 9.5. Really, because Jalen's been balling. Now I'm down to 6.5. This is being held together by Scotch tape. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe Kellen Moore is more of super glue. I'll use a different example. I like the Band-Aid example. They could be potentially putting a Band-Aid on something that needs some serious surgery. Essentially, they have a disgruntled quarterback and a disgruntled head coach because I'm sure Nick Sirianni's not going home to his wife and kids saying, I love the position I'm in right now. I couldn't be more thrilled and honored to be in this role as a coach. And when Jalen was pressed about this report earlier today, he was talking about how important it is for everybody to be in their roles. And he's mentioned that before. And I let it slide. I actually, paraphrasing, but remember making a statement similar to this. I don't think he was throwing shade at Nick. I think he was more just talking about the entire team. If everybody sets in their new role and settles in, they'll be all right. But then he mentioned the role thing again today, and now it's almost as if he's saying, we'll be all right as long as that guy stays where he's supposed to stay. That man right there pointing at Nick. Put him in the same closet that Howie Roseman was shoved into when Chip Kelly took over. You have a disgruntled Nick Sirianni, no matter what brave face he's putting on, a disgruntled Jalen Hurts because of the head coach, who's somewhat okay and somewhat happy because Kellen Moore is here, and it seems like he really believes in those concepts, as he should. And I'm sure his voice was heard more. Yo, this is what I like to do. Yo, why don't we think about this? Hey, let's work together here and let's do it. So that looks strong. But there's just one man in the middle of those two very fractured people. And all it takes is one hiccup. All it takes is one slip up, one little rough patch. And Nick wanting to step in when he doesn't have the power or the role to do so. We're not reading too much into this. We're not. Let's go with, let's see here. I got a couple different audio pieces. Why don't we hear from Nick Sirianni and just the way that he handled talking to the team and the fellas and, you know, people within the Eagles organization and how he was going to handle the accountability front.
If I'm not accountable to the things that I mess up, how am I going to expect them to be accountable to what they mess up, right? And so that's been day one here. That's just not off-season 2024 going into the 24 season. That's been what I've tried to do day one. And I think our world is dying for accountability in a world where there's so many things that you can blame things on. I've said this before. One of the most proud I've ever been of this team is after the Super Bowl, after a loss in the Super Bowl, everyone was trying to give us an out. But the field was really bad, right? Now they had to play. And the response of our players to that, no, they had to play on it too. But that call on Bradbury, I mean, that's what lost it. No, you know, it was a series of plays. But what about this? And what about that? And what about how it was everybody was trying to hand us an excuse, and they just kept going back to no accountability. That's a team. That's the culture that we want to have.
Hold on a second. This is the same guy that allowed Kenny Gainwell to Instagram DM, tweet DMs, whatever it was, in the middle of a game talking smack. I mean, this is the same guy that allowed people last year on the defense to just chase sacks nonstop and not stay within the system. It's a bunch of BS. And when you see someone preach accountability, when they haven't utilized accountability in the past, and they say, this is something I've always tried to establish. This is something that is a big part of my core values, and he doesn't act on that. That's an issue. It's an issue. Now, here's one thing that I haven't really even brought up yet, and maybe that's why everybody's in good spirits now. Maybe they did flush it. Maybe they did. I've had some fractured relationships before, though. I'm not a professional athlete. I'm a human, though. This is more of a human element than a pro athlete thing. And while you don't have to be best friends with everybody in a 53-man locker room and practice squad and this and that, the head coach and the quarterback have to have some level of a fine relationship. Like it's got to be at least some version of fine. It does. I've had fracture relationships, and as much as you pretend, it's always there. Let's not lie. That feeling is always there. So you can put on a brave face and fake it till you make it. But reality is, it's there. It's there. All right, here's Jalen Hurts on the whole Wink situation.
What was the key piece of advice that Wink gave you that kind of you could take into this season?
I'm curious to see where is this coming from randomly, this Wink stuff.
There was a report from ESPN this morning that said he contacted him.
Before the Bucks game.
Something so long ago. Why is that relevant now?
I didn't write it.
First we heard it.
Out today.
Yeah.
Who wrote it?
I wrote it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why is that relevant now?
Why is it relevant?
Yeah.
Trying to give proper context from what happened last season so we have a better understanding of where we are now.
Okay.
I'll tell you why it's relevant. There is a full timeline dating back to 10-1 to where they currently stand. And in that timeline, Jalen Hurts went for answers outside of his own coaching staff. Why is it relevant today? Because you didn't go to the man in charge who's still here currently. That's real. That happened. For all the this is just garbage and fake people, for once, did you hear Jalen debunk it? Well, I didn't do that. No. You know why? Because it actually happened. Everything that's being stated here from someone as credible as Tim McManus is, it's all legitimate. You might not like what you're hearing, but that's different. You not liking what you're hearing doesn't make it not true. And guess what? I don't like hearing this. This isn't what I want. I don't want this. You think I want to sit down here and rip apart an ESPN article that describes how dysfunctional my football team is? This crap pisses me off. But I know it's real. I know this stuff happens. I've seen it. I've heard it. And now we're going through it again. So I thought I was doing well, and this snapped me back into reality. And I'm glad it did. I needed this. It was a smack in the face. It was a wake-up call. Don't be fooled, Brodes. You're smarter than this. And I almost allowed my excitement for football to return. I allowed for that to somewhat overtake me. So thank you, Tim, for bringing it back to light that they essentially, to fix the problem, separated the two. When the most important duo in the game are the two that are closest together. Except for the one outlier, which is the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady. Outside of that. So yes, if Jalen Hurts is the second quarterback to ever live in the history, and by the way, Bill Belichick did have a mastermind of defense. So Nick would also have to have a mastermind offense, which he sure doesn't. All right, that'll do it for me. Appreciate you guys. Love you to death. See you on the next one.